The first time Michael heard it, he thought it was just some late-night radio program. He'd moved into the old apartment building a few weeks ago, and aside from its creaky floorboards and drafty windows, everything seemed fine. And then, one night, while he was getting ready for bed, he heard it. Voices coming from the radio in his apartment. Whispers that sounded like they were coming from right outside his bedroom wall. He turned the radio off and on again, but the voices remained. It was faint at first, like someone whispering very quietly behind a closed door. But there was something strangely compelling about it, like it was trying to tell him something important. The next night the voices came back. This time they were clearer. "Michael," they whispered, his name like a secret shared between old friends. He froze, dropping the book he was reading. Was this some kind of joke? Had someone hacked into his apartment's wiring? But the whispering continued. They were talking about him. "He's in the living room now," one voice said. Another replied, "Yes, I can hear him breathing. Can't you?" They were right. He was in the living room. Hadn't moved since the last time they'd spoken. Days turned into weeks, and the voices grew stronger. He found himself listening to them every night before bed. They told him things about himself he didn't know. They described his dreams, his fears, even his deepest desires. It was as if they knew him better than he knew himself. Then, one night, the voices changed. They began to tell him stories about the building, about its history and its secrets. They spoke of a time when the building was filled with life, when laughter echoed through the halls, and families thrived within its walls. But their tone shifted and became darker. "And then the fire," one voice said, their tone filled with the sorrow. "It took so many. I remember the screams. Oh God, the screams." The other voice whispered, "They say some are still here, trapped in the building, unable to move on because of the fire." As he listened, a chill ran down his spine. Fire. Of course he'd read about the fire in the building's file. A tragic accident, they called it. A faulty wire, they said. But the voices suggested something more, something sinister, as if someone or something had caused the fire intentionally. Michael tried to ignore the voices, to pretend they weren't there, but they wouldn't let him. They followed him around the apartment day and night, whispering their chilling tales. He couldn't concentrate on his work. He couldn't sleep at night. The building, once his sanctuary, had become a prison. One day he decided enough was enough. He packed his things and left the city, moving to a small town far away. The voices followed him there too, though they were weaker now, as if they were struggling to reach him, but they still knew his every move. In the quiet of his new home, Michael heard them more clearly than ever. Then he realized they weren't just telling him the building's history. They were telling him about his own, about his parents who died in a fire, his grandparents who died of a broken heart, even his dog who passed away after being poisoned by a neighbor. All of them had died horrible deaths. But why? Why was he hearing their stories now? What did it mean? And then it hit him, a horrifying thought that sent shivers down his spine. Unit 6C. That's where the whispers seemed to be coming from the abandoned apartment above him. But how could that be? He'd never heard voices before until he moved into this building. And the fire, the old records showed that the fire started in Unit 6C, taking the lives of an elderly couple who'd lived there for decades. What if the couple wasn't just any couple? What if they were his family? He remembered the stories his mother used to tell him about her parents. about how much they loved their home and how they refused to move out, despite the building's age and the complaints about it being haunted. Could this be the same couple? Could they be the ones who died in the fire? Driven by a mixture of fear and curiosity, he decided to investigate. He went to the local courthouse and spent hours digging through old records. Finally, he found what he was looking for: the marriage certificate of his maternal grandparents. Their names were John and Mary Carter, and they lived in Unit 6C. But it wasn't just their names that matched the records. The date on the certificate was the same as the date of the fire. Could it be true? Was Unit 6C really his grandparents' apartment? With his heart pounding in his chest, he returned home and pulled out the old radio he'd found in the apartment's basement. He placed it next to the window facing Unit 6C and turned it on. The static filled the room, and then he heard them. John and Mary, they whispered, their voices filled with joy. They're happy now, aren't they, Martha? Martha. Was that his grandmother's name? Was that the fire's true story? He wanted to scream, to demand answers, but no sound came out of his mouth. He was frozen, trapped in a nightmare of his own making. And then the voices stopped. The radio went silent. He waited, holding his breath, listening for them to start up again. But there was nothing, only the sound of the wind outside. Was it over? Had they stopped whispering? Or were they just waiting, planning their next move? He didn't know. He couldn't tell. The silence was deafening. Then he heard it. A knock on the wall, slow and deliberate, like someone knocking to get his attention. He pressed his ear against the wall, straining to listen. Another knock, then another. Was someone in the apartment above him? He raced upstairs, his heart pounding in his chest, and flung open the door to Unit 6C. It was empty, just as the records had said. There was no one there, or so he thought, because as he turned to leave, he saw it. A figure standing in the corner of the room, tall and thin, its face hidden in the shadows. He froze, his blood running cold. "Who are you?" he whispered, his voice shaking. The figure didn't answer. It just stood there, watching him, waiting. He took a step back, his mind racing. Was this the ghost of his grandfather, his grandmother? Or was something more sinister at play here? Was this the source of the whispers, the thing that had been haunting him, driving him mad with its cryptic messages and terrifying stories? As he stared into the darkness, he felt a presence behind him, something cold and clammy that made the hairs on the back of his neck stand on end. He slowly turned around and saw it, a dark shadow looming over him, reaching out with long, skeletal fingers. He screamed, a primal sound of terror and despair, and ran for the door. But it was too late. The figure was upon him, its icy fingers wrapping around his throat, squeezing the life out of him. He clawed at it, trying to push it away. But it was no use. Its grip was like a vice, and its strength was unnatural. As the air in his lungs slowly began to disappear, he looked into its eyes and saw nothing but darkness. Then, as suddenly as it had appeared, it vanished, leaving him alone in the dusty apartment, with only the echoes of his own screams for company. The voices were gone, replaced by a heavy silence that seemed to press down on him, suffocating him. And then he heard it, a faint whisper that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "Welcome home, Michael," it said. "We've been waiting for you." He stumbled back, his heart pounding in his chest, his mind racing. Had he imagined it all? The voices, the whispers, the figure in the shadows. Or was there something sinister lurking in the old apartment building? Something that had been watching him, waiting for him all along? As he stood there frozen in fear, he knew that he wasn't alone in the building anymore. He was never truly had been. And as the darkness closed in around him, he realized that he was exactly where he was supposed to be.